Vampires. The very word evokes a sense of mystery, fear, and even allure. These creatures of the night have captivated human imagination for centuries. Across cultures and throughout history, tales of vampires have emerged, each reflecting the anxieties and beliefs of their time. From ancient folklore to modern literature and film, vampires continue to hold a prominent place in our collective consciousness. But what is it about these creatures that continues to fascinate us? Is it their immortality, their dark power, or perhaps it's the glimpse they offer into the shadowy corners of our own psyches? In this exploration, we will journey through the history of vampires. We'll uncover the origins of these myths and examine how they have evolved over time. Join me as we delve into the world of the undead, separating fact from fiction and unraveling the enduring appeal of the vampire. Our journey begins in the cradle of civilization, where the earliest whispers of vampiric beings first arose. Long before Bram Stoker penned his iconic Dracula, ancient civilizations grappled with their own versions of the vampire myth. These myths were not just stories, but were deeply embedded in the cultural and spiritual fabric of these societies. In Mesopotamia, tales circulated of Ekimu, vengeful spirits that rose from the grave to prey on the living. These spirits were often thought to be the restless dead, those who had not received proper burial rites or had died violently. These creatures, much like the vampires of later centuries, were believed to drain the life force from their victims. The Ekimu were feared not only for their physical attacks, but also for the psychological terror they inflicted on communities. Ancient Greece offered its own terrifying figures, such as the Lamia, a monstrous being that preyed on children. The Lamia was said to have once been a beautiful queen who, after losing her own children, turned into a child-eating demon. And the Strigas, nocturnal birds that fed on human blood. These creatures were often depicted as old women who could transform into birds, swooping down to feast on the blood of the innocent. These creatures, often associated with disease and misfortune, instilled fear in the hearts of ancient Greeks. The fear of the Strigas was so pervasive that it influenced various aspects of daily life, including rituals and protective charms. The Romans too had their share of vampiric entities. Their myths often intertwined with those of the Greeks, creating a rich tapestry of supernatural lore. The Strix, similar to the Greek strigas, was a bird of ill omen, believed to suck the blood of infants. The Romans believed that these creatures could be warded off with specific rituals and offerings. These ancient myths, passed down through generations, highlight a universal fear of the unknown and the dangers that lurk in the shadows. They served as cautionary tales, warning people of the consequences of improper burial practices and the importance of honoring the dead. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the shores of the Mediterranean, ancient cultures wove tales of creatures that preyed on the living. These stories were not just about fear, but also about the struggle to understand life, death, and the afterlife, their thirst for blood echoing across millennia. The persistence of these myths speaks to a deep-seated human need to explain the unexplainable and to find meaning in the face of mortality. These early myths, while distinct in their details, shared a common thread: the fear of the returning dead and the unseen forces that threaten our mortal realm. They remind us that the line between the living and the dead has always been a source of fascination and dread. The medieval period in Europe saw a surge in vampire folklore. Superstitions surrounding death and the afterlife were rampant. People believed that if a person died under suspicious circumstances, such as suicide or excommunication from the church, they might return from the grave as a vampire. Eastern Europe, in particular, became a hotbed of vampire hysteria. Tales spread of undead creatures preying on villagers, draining them of blood and spreading disease. These creatures, often described as bloated and disfigured, instilled terror in the hearts of rural communities. To combat the perceived threat, communities resorted to vampire hunts. graves were exhumed and bodies suspected of vampirism were desecrated. Stakes were driven through hearts, bodies were burned, and heads were severed in an attempt to prevent the undead from rising again. These gruesome practices, fueled by fear and superstition, highlight the very real terror that vampires inspired in medieval Europe. The science behind the myth Porphyria, rabies, and decomposition. These conditions, though rare and often misunderstood, have fascinating links to the age-old legends of vampires. While vampire myths are often shrouded in superstition, some scientists and historians believe that certain medical conditions may have contributed to these beliefs. By examining historical records and medical literature, we can uncover the roots of these eerie tales. Porphyria, a rare blood disorder, causes a range of symptoms that align with traditional vampire descriptions. This condition affects the production of heme, a component of hemoglobin, leading to a buildup of porphyrins in the body. Individuals with porphyria can experience extreme sensitivity to sunlight, leading to blisters and skin lesions. This photosensitivity can be so severe that it forces sufferers to avoid daylight, much like the nocturnal habits attributed to vampires. They may also suffer from anemia, which can cause paleness and weakness. The lack of red blood cells results in a ghostly pallor, further enhancing the vampire-like appearance. These symptoms, combined with a lack of medical understanding in the past, could easily have been misconstrued as signs of vampirism. In times when medical knowledge was limited, such conditions were often explained through folklore and superstition. Rabies, a viral disease that affects the nervous system, is another possible contributor to vampire lore. This disease, transmitted through animal bites, can drastically alter a person's behavior. Rabies can cause aggression, agitation, and even hallucinations, behaviors that could be interpreted as monstrous or animalistic. The infected individual might display erratic and violent actions, reminiscent of the predatory nature of vampires. The disease can also lead to hydrophobia, a fear of water, which might explain the aversion to running water often attributed to vampires. This symptom, combined with the other rabies-induced behaviors, paints a picture that aligns closely with vampire myths. Furthermore, the natural process of decomposition after death may have fueled vampire beliefs. As bodies decompose, they undergo several changes that can appear quite unsettling to the untrained eye. As a body decomposes, gases can build up, causing it to bloat and appear engorged as if it has recently fed. This bloating can give the impression that the corpse has been feasting, a characteristic often associated with vampires. This, coupled with the oozing of bodily fluids, could easily be mistaken for signs of a vampire's gruesome feeding habits. The sight of blood and other fluids seeping from a corpse might have been interpreted as evidence of nocturnal activities, further cementing the vampire myth in the minds of those who witnessed it. Literary vampires, from Bram Stoker's Dracula to modern interpretations. The evolution of the vampire myth in literature is a fascinating journey through time, reflecting the changing fears, desires, and cultural anxieties of society. The 19th century saw the vampire myth take on a literary life of its own. It was a period of great social and scientific upheaval, and the vampire became a symbol of the unknown and the uncanny. John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, introduced Lord Ruthven, a Byronic anti-hero who seduced and preyed upon high society. This character was inspired by the infamous Lord Byron, whose own life was shrouded in scandal and mystery. This work established many of the tropes that would come to define the modern vampire: aristocratic charm, a thirst for blood, and a seductive, predatory nature. These elements resonated with readers, tapping into deep-seated fears and fascinations. However, it was Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897, that cemented the vampire's place in the Western literary canon. Stoker's novel was a product of its time, reflecting Victorian anxieties about sexuality, immigration, and the unknown. Stoker's iconic novel, with its chilling depiction of Count Dracula, a Transylvanian nobleman who preys on Victorian London, established the vampire as a figure of both horror and fascination. The character of Dracula has since become a cultural icon, representing the ultimate predator and the ultimate outsider. Following in Stoker's footsteps, countless authors have reimagined the vampire myth. Each new interpretation reflects the concerns and preoccupations of its time, from the existential angst of the 20th century to the romantic fantasies of the 21st. Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, 1976, introduced a more sympathetic and introspective vampire grappling with the complexities of immortality and morality. Rice's vampires are deeply human in their emotions and struggles, making them relatable and compelling. Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series, 2005 to 2008, reimagined vampires as romantic heroes, sparking a resurgence in vampire popularity among young adult readers. Meyer's vampires are not just monsters, they are complex characters with their own desires and dilemmas. From the gothic horror of Stoker to the introspective narratives of Rice and the romantic entanglements of Meyer, literary vampires continue to evolve, reflecting changing cultural anxieties and our enduring fascination with the undead. Each new generation of vampire stories adds new layers to the myth, ensuring that the vampire remains a powerful and versatile symbol in literature.